Paul Maconachie, thanks for being with us today, man. Glad to have a little bit of your time.
Hey, it's great to see you, John.
Yeah, it's really, really cool to have you. So just to give everybody a refresher, I mean, those of us, at our church, the Gathering Network, our leadership will know who you are. Paul is a longtime friend of the Gathering Network, currently serving on the board of 3D Movements, some dear friends of ours who have shaped us profoundly. Well, let me tell you why I called and why I feel like I'm really excited about our team getting to hear from you. We've been in the midst of this move going from one venue to the next, and we just that kind of came on us pretty quickly at the end of the year last year, and just very, very early on as we were praying about it, I just felt like the Lord was just saying, hey, this is less about where you're called to go, but more about who you're called to be. And through your influence, through the influence of 3DM, authors like Bob Ronglian and everybody else, and the whole up in and out description of what it means to follow Jesus, we've received this language from you guys that we're living a Jesus-shaped life, which is truly everything that we wanted when we kind of left a more attractional, programmatic mode of doing church to become a disciple-making church on mission. The real, we all have our reasons why we do that kind of stuff, but for me, I think one of the main drivers for me personally was that I really felt like the world beyond the church was just asking to see an authentic follower of Jesus.
Yeah.
I was like, man, if we could do that, if we could just raise up mature followers of Jesus so the world could at least have something to look at and go, that's it. That's what somebody with a life and a heart fully devoted to Jesus looks like. The Lord was just reminding us as we make this move that that's really, really what we're doing. We're working out a call to live a certain kind of way, a Jesus-shaped life. And so I went to him and I'm like, okay, I don't just want to go to the Gathering Network I don't just want to go to our people and just say, okay, it's up in and out, go, right? In these big generic terms, I was really going, okay, God, help us know in behavioral terms. What does it look like for us at this stage in the game for us to be maturing, for us to be growing as Jesus-shaped disciples? And so what does a Jesus-shaped disciple, a follower of Jesus, look like? What do they do behaviorally? What do they do habitually? And I just landed on these three words. It just kind of came across my mind when prayer, discipleship, and evangelism. Maturing followers of Jesus, they just go to prayer. It's their habit. It's what they do. They make disciples who can make disciples. And then lastly, they evangelize. And I think that's the word that we're trying to reclaim a little bit. I mean, we all know that that's kind of a weird word out in Christendom. There's a certain kind of person that we're all trying to not be.
Yeah.
But who is it that we are to be, as we communicate the good news of the kingdom out there? So anyway, all of that to say, we just got back from California. We were at the 3DM Generals Retreat. I'm going to let you describe that in just a second. But at that retreat, we go every year, and you give a State of the Union, hey, this is what I think God is saying and doing. And sure enough, man, you started talking, and point 1, 2, and 3, prayer, discipleship, evangelism. And it was such a massive confirmation to me, man, as it just tends to be with you, man. I know that you're a man after God's heart. I know that about you. I hear that in you all the time. Privileged to have you here today, and excited to hear you talk about more than just us being fully devoted followers of Jesus, but actually a great awakening. So, A, tell us about the Generals Retreat, and then B, I'm going to let you just hit the ground running and kind of roll this out for us.
Sure. Well, it's great. It's great having you guys there with us in LA, and it's I always love connecting with the Gathering Network, and it's just feels like family, doesn't it? And and just like for you, it was really encouraging for me to hear that you'd already heard the same stuff, because hey, we're supposed to be part of the same kind of move of God across the country. So if we come together and we find out we're all hearing the same stuff, that's just super encouraging, isn't it?
Right.
So the Generals Gathering, actually Generals Gathering is what Mike Breen used to call it back in the day. I tend to not use that term as much, but it's kind of stuck because people like it. But it's basically the annual national 3DM Leaders Retreat. So it's basically the people who are running, 3DM is now decentralized. There isn't one big central organization like there used to be in Paulies Island. There's just lots of different hubs and centers around the country. So it feels like it's important that we have time once a year just to all get together, hear what's going on, reconnect, seek the Lord together. So that's what the Generals Gathering is, or the annual leadership retreat is. And so it's been great every year having some of the folks from Gathering Network come and be part of that. And so yeah, I mean, shall I just share a bit about this word that I felt the Lord had given me?
I mean, just to start, like, tell us where it came from. Like, what's stirring in you behind these three ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, we've been asking the question of 3DM around, the whole 3DM thing came out of this church in Sheffield that Mike Breen pastored, and then I pastored for 10 years after him. And what we saw there was something quite remarkable. We saw hundreds of people just living very, very kind of submitted lives and seeing a lot of breakthrough. And during the time I was leading the church there, from 2007 probably through to about 2014 when I came to the States, we were seeing, just as a church, we were seeing maybe between 250 and 300 people a year come to faith through missional communities. And go right the way through the 20 years I was at that church, 20 plus years, really what was going on, there was lots of things we learned to do, lots of practical stuff, but the other side of that was that I think there was genuinely a move of God at that church. And we had levels of encounter with God at different times over those 20 years, which I've never experienced anywhere else. And we had prophetic encounters, we had power encounters. I mean, I remember times where we had some worship and prayer nights. At the end of the evening, there wasn't a single person left standing, just because of the level of the presence of God. And that was the context within which lots of young men and women, mainly young men and women. So the church, when I was leading it, was 80% under 40, so it was a young church. But lots of young men and women who basically just went all in. And so then when we described that, because then the way 3DM grew was other churches began to see what was going on and say, well, can we come and see what you're doing? And more of our time was spent with other pastors and other churches. So in the end, we started 3DM and said, well, look, if we're going to do this, let's do it properly and learn how to do this and help churches. And then we've gone through this whole journey of teaching churches about missional communities and all this other stuff. But the question that we kept coming back to, and I've asked this question many times, and so's Mike Breen as he stepped back. So he stepped back from leading 3DM a couple of years ago now, 3 years ago. And he had a couple of years where he just didn't do anything publicly and just spent time seeking the Lord. And one of the big questions he was asking was the same question I think I've been asking, which is, why are we not seeing more breakthrough in these churches? So what we're generally finding is churches that go on that journey of up and out and really going after missional community and all that kind of stuff, living the life. What you usually find is if you come back to them 2 or 3 years later when they've been on that journey for a while, almost always the folks who've been doing it would say, I'm never going back. I'd never do stuff differently. I can't go back to the attractional way. This is how we're supposed to do church. This is how we're supposed to do life. So that's been good. But what we haven't seen are many places where there's been hundreds of people coming to faith through it. It feels like it's kind of stalled a bit, yeah?
Right.
And so, we've certainly seen that happen in our own setting, but we're asking the question of the Lord, why is that not happening as much here in the States? And really, this was the answer that we feel that the Lord's been showing us, is that you really have to do all three of those components that you just talked about. You have to really learn to be people of prayer, people who engage with the presence of God, people who spend lots of time with Him, who learn how to listen to Him, who bring your needs to Him, all of those things. So there's the prayer thing. But we also, and we have to learn how to make disciples. And that's the thing that 3DM has majored in over the last 10 years, learning how to make disciples. And I think we know quite well how to do that now. And you guys have been part of that. You've been part of that innovation, part of that learning. I would say give somebody in the Gathering Network, or give somebody in 3DM a person who's saying, I'm all in, disciple me. I think we know how to do that. Yeah. But the thing that we haven't had is hundreds of people saying, yeah, I'm ready, disciple me. So what we've tended to have is relatively small numbers of highly committed people going after the things of the Jesus-shaped life, and we haven't yet tipped into large numbers in many settings. There's a couple of places where we've seen it. We've seen it, for example, with Grace Midtown in Atlanta. They've shifted there and they've seen hundreds of people. We're beginning to see it, I think, at Grace Gathering in Fort Wayne, where we are with our youth. So we had 20 high school youth 3 years ago. We've now got 120, and that shift has been through conversion. I mean, we're baptizing teens all the time. So we've got one or two places where we're seeing hints of it. But the big question is, why are we not seeing that in much? There's hundreds of churches that have gone on the 3DM journey across the country now. Why are we not seeing more? And this is the answer that we felt that the Lord was giving us. So interesting, and exactly the same answer that he was giving you as you're saying, what's it look like to walk authentically? And it's the classic thing. I mean, you guys know Up in Out Triangle. What we say with the Up in Out Triangle is almost always churches do 2 out of the 3. Well, we're feeling like almost all of the settings that we connect with 3DM, who know all the stuff, they know the life shapes, they're trying to live the life. But when you actually look in detail at what they're doing, almost all of them are doing 2 out of the 3 of prayer, discipleship, and evangelism. And so you get guys doing lots of prayer, lots of discipleship, but not much evangelism. That's common. Another common one is lots of discipleship, lots of evangelism, not much prayer. That's common. But what we're not seeing is people who are doing all of it.
Right.
So on the back of that, I've been looking at great awakenings and revivals historically, and also looking at the one that we have a record of in the Bible, which is obviously Pentecost and the book of Acts, which is basically a story of the first great awakening, isn't it? It's a story of the first great move of God through the church. And it's interesting because I think you see those things at play every time. So I mean, if you think about Pentecost, Acts 1:12 to 14, it says that the disciples went upstairs to the room where they were staying, and they joined constantly in prayer. And of course, they're responding to what Jesus said. So the last thing that Jesus said before the ascension was not the Great Commission. The last thing he gave the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all people groups. But the last thing he said was, wait until you've been clothed with power from on high. Yeah. So then what did they do? Acts 1:12 to 14, they went into an upper room, they joined constantly in prayer. That's how they understood Jesus when he said, wait until you're clothed with power. So they did that. And then, of course, Acts 2, Pentecost came, they are clothed with power, they have the tongues of fire on their heads, they start speaking in tongues. And so that's the first component to me, is that component of wait until you're clothed with power. And I think we have to learn how to wait on God in prayer, both personally and corporately. And I think depending on your personality, depends on whether you find the first one or the second one easy. So I'm an introvert.
Right.
So I love spending time with God in prayer on my own. I find spending time in a prayer meeting hard.
It's
I don't like that.
I'm an extrovert, and I do a lot of like public prayer meeting at my. And the personal stuff is the place where it's like, man, it's really, really hard for me. So it's interesting that even at the end of this last year, I felt like that's what the Lord was calling me to. He's basically saying you'll have the fruit in your life and ministry that you get from me in your personal time of waiting on me in prayer.
Totally.
Yeah.
And of course, Jesus modeled both, didn't he? Because you have records of him praying with the disciples there. For example, in John 16 and 17, they're clearly there, because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to write down the record of the prayers that he was praying. And he's talking to them about the Lord's Prayer and all those things. But it also says in the Gospels that he often went away to solitary places and sought the Lord. So Jesus did both. So we're living a Jesus-shaped life. That means whichever one we favour in our personality, we're all committed to doing both personal and corporate prayer.
Yeah.
And then to me, there are 3 main categories of prayer that you see. Devotional prayer, and to me that includes worship. Worship is a form of prayer, I think, even sung worship or other kinds of worship. So devotional prayer, which is about the relationship with God. Then you have petition, which is like asking God to do stuff for you. And then I think there's a third level. And the petition thing is usually with thanksgiving. It says in Philippians, doesn't it? Bring all your requests to God, your petitions, with thanksgiving. And so there's something about thanking God for what he's done and then asking him for other stuff. And then the third kind is a devotion and petition. And then the third kind to me is intercession. And the thing about intercession is it's more like, I think you usually access a place of intercession through kind of devotional time. And it's really a deep place of communion with God where you're beginning to pray the things God's wanting you to pray rather than just bringing your agenda. Yeah. So I would say, we have to wait on God in prayer. If we want to be clothed with power, we have to learn how to wait on God in prayer, personally and corporately. And we have to learn to do all three kinds of prayer: devotional prayer, petitional prayer, and intercession. And I think in all of those things, Jesus said, wait. They actually had to wait quite a long time before Pentecost happened. It didn't happen like the next day.
See, I wanted to ask about that. Like, what do you think that moment felt like? What did it look like? Like when we're talking about fervent prayer, waiting prayer, in the space like a missional community, like what do you think that looked like for them? What did that look like, feel like when you're talking about it not happening just immediately?
I think it depends, because I think in some it depends what your missional community is like. I mean, if you've got a missional community that's like half of the people in it aren't yet Christians, then you're not gonna have like great big prayer meetings there.
Right.
So I think that missional communities, I mean, what we would say is that to run a missional community well, you've got to have space for one evening and one meeting, and the evening would be when you do like your missional community time with your meal and all that. But I think you need at least one other time in the week where you can meet with your core team, who are the other Christians that are really leading it with you. And you kind of do a mixture of prayer and huddle, I think. I mean, I don't mean huddle like learning the life checks. I mean, asking what's God saying, what are we going to do about it? And praying together. And I think that place, that is the time where often in a missional community, if you need breakthrough, you'll find God's actually drawing you to spend more time like that together.
Right.
And so, we've really got to press in and pray, because our folks, the folks who don't yet know the Lord, who are in the missional community, still haven't come to faith, and we haven't had the breakthrough. So you're pressing in. And I think it's a mixture of speaking and listening. There's a prophetic side to it, isn't there? You're listening, you're getting words from the Lord and scriptures, you're asking him for breakthrough, you're praying. And I think, Jesus said that we should pray and persevere, pray and not give up. And he said that we should keep on asking and we'll receive, keep on seeking, we'll find, keep on knocking and the door will be opened. Yeah. And I actually think if you want to be clothed with power, you have to do all three things. So like keep on asking is like, Lord, we need a breakthrough. Come on, please give us a breakthrough. Seeking would be reading about accounts of other people who've had breakthroughs, listening to testimonies, finding people who've gone further than you have and sitting at their feet, going to the conferences, access. It's like the pilgrimage kind of component. You're saying, okay, we're going to really seek after this. We're going to go after. Yeah. We want that power. And then the knocking, I think, is the active thing. So it's like, we're going to not just talk about it, but we're going to actually properly pray together in corporate meetings. We're going to do evangelism. We're going to, identify a people of peace. We're going to live the life. So that's the knocking thing, I think. And I think, I think that when people wait on God in prayer, but they don't see breakthrough, and sometimes people have said to me, I've been doing this for ages, for months or years, and I've never seen breakthrough. But when I push them, often they're only doing one of those three things. They're asking, but they're not really seeking and knocking. So I think there's something about entering into the fullness of what Jesus is teaching us to do. Because actually that thing on keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking, I think in the Luke version, that was straight after he just taught on prayer. So it's in that context. Yeah.
And, I think, man, a big part of that is being able to even identify the breakthrough that you want to see.
Totally.
I sometimes I just feel like the Lord is saying, well, what do you want? What do you want? And we're not even aware of what we want. Sometimes we don't even know that we get to factor that into the equation. Yeah. We get to maybe turn what is a burden into something that we get to carry before the Lord, and we get to pray until it quits. We get to pray.
Yeah. And I think that is
what the breakthrough is that you want to see bring, and then just drill in, keep going for it.
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing there is the definition of faith to me, because faith is being certain of things that we don't yet see. Mm-hmm. So, you kind of got to see it in your mind and your heart before you see it in reality, haven't you?
Yeah, that's
right. Get a sense of a vision for it. Yeah. So that would be the first thing, I think. And as I've looked at examples of revival around the world and great awakenings, I've read dozens and dozens of accounts ranging from, the Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, the Methodist revival in the UK, the Hebridean revival in Scotland, the Indonesian revival in the 70s. I mean, there's so many examples of God moving with power. But I've not found a single example that hasn't been preceded by people waiting on God in prayer.
Yeah.
I mean, the Welsh revival, which changed the world, really, because, I mean, it saw 100,000 people come to faith in Wales in the turn of the 20th century, 19th to the 20th. But it also sowed the seeds of the Pentecostal revival. I mean, William Seymour in Azusa Street wrote to Evan Roberts and said, "What did you do? I mean, what do we do?" And those folks in that Welsh revival, I mean, they basically had prayer meeting after prayer meeting before it happened. It hadn't happened yet. And they were saying, "Lord, you have to change our hearts. You have to bend us." That was the language they used.
Yeah, bend us.
Crying out, "Come on, Lord, you have to do this." And they were doing that and building, the momentum built through prayer before they actually started to see people come to faith,
Yeah. What do you think it is that's behind that? Like, what's driving that move towards prayer in them, in those great awakenings? Like, what's the precursor to that? I mean, just a desire to see God move, like a hopelessness.
Yeah, I think it's a hunger. I think it's not being satisfied. It's no longer being satisfied with what people have got. And I think there's a repentance and a mercy even in that, because I think, as Christians, we can go through our whole lives being satisfied with what we already have. But there's so much more. C.S. Lewis said that, one of the things he thought when we got to heaven we would feel sad about is that we settled for so little, while we're on earth. And so I think it's getting a vision that there's more. And, at the end of the day, the early stages of waiting on God in prayer is sacrificial. And if you're going to pay a price, it's because you have some idea that you want the prize, and that it's worth it. I think that as you press in and you begin to overcome the kind of resistance and inertia that all of us have towards, really going for prayer, I think then it begins to start to be a reward in its own right. I think you start to have more of a sense of God's presence, more of a sense of God's leading, and so then it begins to build momentum. But I think early on there is a sacrificial. It's like, I know this is right, Lord, and I know we haven't got what you want, and so we're going to choose to start banding together in prayer and just praying until we see some breakthrough.
Take us into the evangelism stuff, man. And I think it's an interesting order: prayer, evangelism, discipleship, in terms of the up, in, and out. It's kind of like the up, out, in.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So walk us through the evangelism.
Yeah. Well, the reason I've told
we're all kind of coming to this thing of going, we have to proclaim the gospel. Our personal story of what God has done in our lives. If we don't want to just sit around in a church and just disciple each other,
Totally. So to me, this is the area actually that Mike Breen has really been working on over the last 2 years. So the bit that he felt God was calling him to focus on was, how do we learn to share the gospel in a way that really gets breakthrough? And so he's doing these huddles with people all around the country at the moment called Awakening Huddles, where he's basically spending a year taking people through a process in a huddle of learning. How do I really learn how to share the gospel in a way that brings people to the point of decision, to conversion? Obviously, you can only bring people to that point. Conversion is a miracle that only the Holy Spirit can do.
Right.
But we can still help people to get to the point where they're ready for that, can't we? And we're co-workers with Christ. In His mercy, God chooses to use us. So it's important that we learn how to do that well. And the big questions that we've been asking 3DM about that is two big questions, really. The first is, what is the story and history of the people that you're trying to reach? So do you understand the people that you're trying to share the gospel with? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the second one is, what is the gospel that you carry? So, we're not looking for Sunday school answers there.
Right.
It's not like, we know that there is something called the gospel, which is like this, objective truth that stands for all time. But actually, all of us have an insight and an experience of the gospel that is specific to us as well. So, in the Bible, there's the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yeah. I'd suggest that in 21st century America, there is also the gospel according to John Shirley. Yeah. And it's still the same gospel, but it's just like, one of the things we felt God's challenging us on is, that we actually need to know, what are the specifics of the message that I carry, that I can share. So I'm not just trying to think of some generic message that I think people should hear, but I'm genuinely sharing my story of how the gospel has worked in me and through me, and the message that the gospel has given me to share. Does that make sense?
Oh, dude, it totally does. And when we were sitting, in California, and you brought this up, I mean, it was just a really simple exercise. I think you used a metaphor of a vista.
Yeah. The mountain thing. You're standing on top of a mountain, looking out over a vista.
Yeah.
So this is something that Mike Breen came up with. It's very helpful, I think. So, well, imagine that you're standing on a mountain and you're looking out over this great plain that's in front of you, and to the left, as you look out at the sweep of the land to the left. That's the Old Testament. Okay, and as you look out, what are the landmarks that you see? What are the stories? Who are the characters? What are the scriptures that really stand out to you? And then once you've done that, then as you look to the right in this imaginary vista, you look out over the land to the right. That's the New Testament. And again, the same question. So what are the stories? Who are the characters? And what are the scriptures that really stand out to you as landmarks? So, I mean, for example, for me, one of the things that's always stuck with me is a phrase. This is one of the scriptures. It's a phrase that God used in Deuteronomy 28 when he's doing the curses and blessings to the people of Israel. And one of the blessings he gives is he says, you will be the head and not the tail.
Yeah.
So for me, when I'm sharing, whenever I'm sharing the gospel, one of the phrases that is always very powerful when I use it, because it's real for me and it's authentic, it's not just something I've learned, is be the head, not the tail. Mm-hmm. It's like, you got to be the head, not the tail. And if you're being wagged, that's not God's plan for you. Yeah. God wants you to be able to make decisions about your life and have the power to carry them out. And so that's an example. So, most people would agree that is part of the gospel, but for lots of people, that wouldn't be their focus. Whereas for me, that's one of the landmarks that stands out, because that's part of the gospel that I carry.
Right. It was
what about you, John? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember that day, and it didn't take long. In fact, I looked down on our whole team. It looked like we were all buried, heads buried, scribbling out the first little, vision of what our gospel was. And it's so interesting, man, because just at the end of 2017, I started to see, because we're asking, what is the mission of God? Is it only toward people who, are outside the family of God, people who are, spiritually discouraged, disconnected, lost,
Yeah.
Or is it something else? And I was reading through Acts again. It's clearly Peter, his gospel was to the Jews. Paul, his gospel was to the Gentiles. I mean, they kind of go back and forth a little bit, but it's
totally.
It's there's this call to those who are in, to become fully alive in Christ. And then there's this call to those who are without to come in and get fully alive in Christ. And so I just scratched down on the deal. It's the gospel according to John is there's more.
Yeah.
And it's for nominal Christians, it's there's more. And for those who are beyond, who are outside the family of God looking in, it's there's more. There's more for your life than So I started to look through every sermon, started to look through nearly every song I've ever written, every way that I lead worship, all that stuff. And I was oh my goodness, it's always there's more. It's funny, man, when I rewind back to 2007, 2008, 2009, when God was beginning to speak to us about being a disciple making church on mission, the whole thing was about there being more. It was even the way that I tell the stories, I remember standing in front of our church, leading worship, and I'm looking at everybody and I'm kind of going, there's so much more than this that God is.
Cool.
So in one way, it was comical.
Hey, man, you're evangelizing me right now. Right. I tell you, I'm with you, brother.
And then on the other side of the fence, it was. I literally just showed it to Alyssa. I wrote it down and I showed it to her. And she just kind of shook her head oh my goodness, that is so me. And I think that's what we're all looking for. Especially when we're trying to reclaim evangelism, the thing that we're all hesitant to is to just go out into the world and to try to do some apologetic one-up on everybody, which is, some guy in some class at some workshop told me this to you when you say that. Yeah. And to be the person that's trying to change your worldview. It's we're not trying to do that. We're trying to just insert the truth that Jesus
well, the thing is
saying to every fiber of our being,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
to us, yeah.
The thing is, trying to share someone else's message really sucks. I mean, it just is not good. Yeah.
Oh,
what we have to learn to do is to share our message. And in order to share our message, we have to know what our message is.
Right.
And in order to do that, we need to communicate with God and with other believers and think through, how has God impacted me? What's he doing? And begin to own it. And if we can begin to get some key kind of phrases and messages there that help us to communicate it, so much the better.
Yeah.
But, I am totally a non-evangelist. I hate evangelism. I don't like it when people do it to me, and I don't like doing it to other people. I love preaching to the choir, But this has been a breakthrough for me, because as long as I thought I had to share someone else's message, let's share the 4 spiritual laws, which is something that an awesome Christian came up with, but it's not what I came up with. Right. It's just hard. Whereas now that I'm beginning to get what my message is, I'm finding it much easier to share that because it's authentic and it's real.
Well, man, the Vista analogy and all this that you're bringing today is really helpful to us, because I think that this is probably, the biggest tweak that we've made since we really, set out to become a Jesus-shaped church, and it's that mission is a who. And,
absolutely.
Mission,
a who, not a what.
And mission is a who and not a what. And even if there is a what, it's like, well, in the what, there's a who. And so when there's someone, a real human being with hurts and pains and lostness and confusion standing in front of us, what can we say to them that is ours? What can we say to them that is true? And I think this is something that we're setting our hearts on in 2018, is to grow in gospel fluency, because we just really believe that, we've been as a church through a pruning, and we feel like the Lord is saying it's time for us to begin to sprout. Even in this, there's something about that. It's about us really learning how to sprout, and in doing so, there will be this proclaiming thing. And I just sense, man, the gathering, our courage is growing. We're ready for this.
Cool.
I think that we've been through a long season of growing in competencies in discipleship primarily, which is what we're going to talk about next. Learning how to wait on God to be clothed with power. I think that that's a promise that we have, that if we just wait on him, that God will give us the power to, not just like go into the world and rage, evangelism, but it's like when there's a real honest to goodness person of peace who's just right there, who is like, I love you. I'm ready to hear from you. I'm ready to hear your story, your truth, your gospel, that we just have just something to bring in 1,000 different ways that matches our personality, whether we're, introverted, extroverted, social, not as social, quiet, louder, feeler, not feeler, whatever, that there's a way that God has hardwired us to bring our story to bear in a way that's really fruitful and honest. So this is great. Yeah. Thank you for this, man.
Excellent.
So discipleship would probably be, if I were to guess, like us as a church, we're probably more at ease and confident. That's probably our strongest foot forward right now. It's what we've devoted ourselves to for about the last, 8 or so years, is really becoming a church of disciple makers. So let's end on this. Encourage us again, man, around.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the follow on. I mean, so in this passage we're looking at, which is the Acts 2 passage, it's the very next bit. So, I mean, you guys will know this passage inside out, Acts 2, 42 to 47. You said you've devoted yourself to learn to do discipleship. Well, that's how it starts, doesn't it? It says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, the breaking of bread and prayer. It talks about signs and wonders being done. It talks about the believers being together and sharing resources with each other. It says about home and temple. They meet together in the temple courts and break bread in their homes. And then it says God added daily to their number those who are being saved. So this is so they started at the beginning of Acts 2 by waiting, or Acts 1 into Acts 2, waiting. Acts 2, they're clothed with power. Then they preach the gospel for a response, and they include challenge as well as invitation there. And people become Christians, and then they go into this season where they're just doing this amazing kind of discipleship lifestyle. And to me, I would say if we're kind of drilling down to kind of core stuff with making disciples, I would say it's having some sort of core team and doing which isn't just what we would say is the minimum unit of the kingdom is always two, and it's 2 units. So a married couple to me is 1 unit. Yeah. So I think you need at least 2 single people or 2 married couples or a married couple and a single person. You need at least 2 units. You've got that core team, and you do a family or mission lifestyle. So you're doing up in and out. You've got predictable patterns. You've got missional purpose. There's spiritual parents involved. There's people leading it. So it's all of those things. So that'd be the first thing. You have a core team of believers that you're on mission with and doing life with. And you kind of got to like them, because you're going to spend a lot of time with those people. Yeah?
Would help. Yeah, would help.
So that'd be the first thing, core team and family or mission lifestyle. The second thing to me would be both temple and home. So it's like, and I think you guys have really been working in the Gathering Network on getting the balance right. I think the balance in the US is way too far towards temple and not enough towards home.
Right.
And you've been redressing that balance. But you guys still believe in both, don't you? There's got to be times where you get everybody together. And I think even within the waiting to be clothed with power, there's something very powerful about a prayer meeting that has, more than 100 people at it.
Right.
As well as something powerful about a prayer meeting with 5 or 6 people in a home. You need both, don't you?
Yeah, we do.
And then the breaking bread, eating together. So eating together is part of discipleship. And, I think if you took miracles and food out of the Gospels, there'd be hardly anything left. So it's eating together. And the miracles thing leads on to the third one. So it's core team, family or mission lifestyle, temple and home. And the third one would be word and spirit. And it's engaging with the Bible together. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, it says in Acts, but also prophecy, healing, signs and wonders. Even back when Jesus taught the people of peace principle in Luke 10, he said, pray for the sick and heal them, raise the dead. So there's something about, if we have an authentic message that we've learned how to give to people, that's great. But if we also can follow our message, there's accompanying signs and wonders, then it's really, really hard for people to pretend like it's just in our heads,
Yeah. No,
and there's nothing like, and with that little move of God I was talking about in our youth at Grace Gathering, a lot of that has been through them actually praying for healing. They've seen they saw one kid who had broken his leg. His leg got healed, and that had a massive impact.
Yeah.
So there's things like that are a big deal. And when you look back through the history of Great Awakenings, I think this discipleship thing is a big part of it. So one of the great figures of the second Great Awakening was Charles Finney. He just did it totally blatantly. So he used to go on his horse to a town or a village, and I've read his own kind of journal, which he wrote. He wrote his own autobiography. So I've read that. And outside the town or the village, he would find a space in the woods and he'd just kneel and wait in prayer. And he said sometimes he'd only have to wait minutes, sometimes it would be hours, sometimes it would be days. But he'd wait until he felt the power of God come on him. And he doesn't really describe what that experience was, but he knew. Yeah. So then he'd go in and he'd go into the town and he'd organise a meeting at the town hall or the church or whatever, and he'd preach the gospel and people would come to faith. And then he'd spend the next few weeks going from house to house, teaching them how to live a lifestyle that honours God, and just using that method, that one man, they think, brought 500,000 people to faith in the northeast of the United States in the 19th century. So it's not like there were that many people around even, but he still saw and that was part of that Great Awakening. So, there definitely was, even in those kind of Victorian time kind of era, there really was power, supernatural power. You can't just do this by coming up with some great strategies and living a good lifestyle. You need the Holy Spirit at work as well. So I'd say those 3 things: core team in a family or mission lifestyle, balance of temple of home, and word and spirit. And I think you need all 3 of those things if you're going to live authentic discipleship lifestyle.
Yeah. This is awesome, man. I think a lot of times when we're thinking about, just to step back to the supernatural power thing, I think a lot of times we think of that only in terms of miracles and healing and deliverance and things like that, things that seem really, extraordinary. We don't really ever just factor into it, just confidence.
Yeah.
Just like a surge of confidence or just a surge of faith, man. And all of this, man, is just really,
well, and results, I think, as well. I think, you can actually give exactly the same. You can share the same gospel with someone twice and have completely different results depending on what the supernatural power of God is doing.
Right.
I mean, you can't tell me that those 3,000 who believed on the day of Pentecost, that was just because Peter was a good speaker.
Right.
There was something else going on there, wasn't there?
Well, let it be for us too, man. Let
Totally.
it be for us too. So, Paul, man, this is getting us down the road today, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate
it's great to just reflect on it with you. And, we're hearing God say the same thing, aren't we? So
yeah.
I guess if we know what God's saying, then it's just on us to decide to start doing it.
Well, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you, helping me say it better than I could have said it on my own today, man. So thanks for that, man.
Hey, it's great to hang out with you.
Yeah, you too, man.